All right, welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Stephen Bonnell again, Destiny, as you guys might know him by. And yeah, no, we're not going to talk with him. And I'm sorry if I put you all to sleep, but tonight we're going to get in our hot takes, because tonight what we're going to be doing when we talk about Steve is talk about his take on Trump's handling of coronavirus. And I think the best way to go about this is to review his video on that's entitled Destiny Bullies Undecided Voters. So have fun, folks. If you thought the last take that we had with Steve was boring and put you to sleep, here's a place where we're going to disagree. And here's a place where the flaming hot takes, volcano hot takes come out. Let's have fun, folks.
I have cheap gas bills because of fracking. And I remember what it used to be in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. $300-400 gas bills in a winter. Now I have $100 gas bill in the winter.
So one thing that you guys have to keep in mind when we talk about things like climate change, right? A lot of people, I remember when I fought with that Ryan over this, the Intercept guy, people are always very quick to say like, oh, climate change is really important to the average American, but no, climate change is a very bougie middle class issue. You know, now it might affect poor people, but poor people care more at the end of the day about like their energy bills than whether or not they're making some arbitrary contribution to the net total difference in carbon in the world, right? That like what that guy just said is a very good point in terms of like what does a working class person notice? Well, if the bills last year for energy were $60 and before that 50 and before that 40 and before that 30 and now they're approaching 100, that's the type of thing that a working class person notices. They don't care if they're making some vague contribution towards the climate of the entire planet or whatever. It's very, very, very important that if we're going to talk about moving into like a carbon neutral or methane neutral or whatever type of gas neutral future, you know, some sort of energy independent model where we're on green energy, you have to be heavily subsidizing this by the government. You can't have poor people or working class people like regressively paying the costs of these increases in energy. And
right. So if we're going to if we're phasing something out and we have to force it upon people through this taxation system that we're talking about, obviously you're going to have to make certain sacrifices. And if you were willing to actually make those sacrifices, those sort of things would already be in place, which means that what you're forcing down onto people is something they actually don't want. This seems to me to be very anti-democratic, Steve.
the increase in energy isn't just in your bill as well for your gas or electric bill. It's also going to come in the form of paying more for goods and services. Your food is going to be more expensive. Things you buy at the store are going to be more expensive because the vehicles used to transport these things are going to cost more as well. Green energy is awesome, but it's still very expensive, and that has to be accounted for.
Yes, is it really awesome or is it awful? Because it seems to me that people are already voting with their wallets. And if it weren't for the fact that you have to force this, you have to not only subsidize the industry itself, you have to subsidize the people who are going to be ruined by economically ruined by forcing down these industries on us. Now, I know we're going off on a tangent. This is supposed to be about Destiny's take on Trump's handling of COVID. We're not going to review this entire video. It's 44 minutes and 12 minutes long. We're going to get there. Trust me.
For when you're talking about enacting government policy. Do you think Biden saying he'd want to transition out of the oil industry will be significantly bad for turning red states? I don't know. I mean, like right now, so if we bring up the RCP averages on, these are the big swing states that we're looking at right now, all these are leaning fairly heavily Biden.
Oh my God. He didn't ask you if those states would be swung. He said, would it actually hurt Biden? Would there be a causal effect? He didn't ask you if Biden was in the lead. He said, is that lead, whatever distance that is, effectively, is that lead at least partially determined by his stance on oil? And by the way, what do you think is there really a difference between getting rid of oil and phasing it out, Steve? What's the difference here? If we're going to phase it out, what's going to happen over time? We're going to get rid of it. Yeah, so this is at best, a distinction without a difference.
North Carolina's close, 1.8. Florida's pretty close, 2.1. But every other state is pretty 3 points or more swinging for Biden. Some of these 4 points, 5, 6, 7, 8 points almost.
Just a quick aside. Yeah. So anything that's within 4 points is a Trump win. And here's why I say this. I've said this repeatedly. I don't think Destiny quite gets this. This is why you can't go by polls perfectly. Democrat voters tend to skew young, which means they don't turn out well at the polls. That's, to me, why a 4-point difference is a Trump win. So if Trump's losing by 8, he's going to lose that state. If he's losing by 1, he's got a really good chance of winning that state.
I don't know. The oil comment was pretty scary. I think Biden needs to be very careful when you dance around that. We're going to get rid of oil. Well, hold on. When I say get rid of oil, I mean we're going to slowly transition over time, and we're going to support the workers that work.
Oh my God. What do you think transition over time means? What do you think transition away from that means? It means get rid of it, Steve. What happens at the end of the day? Is it still there, or has it been gotten rid of?
In those oil fields, because a lot of labor unions, what is the AFL-CIO? Is that the largest? This federation of unions, a lot of these guys have been very hesitant about certain green energy programs because they don't want to see all of their jobs just disappear forever without any sort of replacement. So you have to be appeasing these labor unions when you talk about moving towards these type of green energy models, because the average fossil fuel worker isn't just going to sit by and watch their job get trashed as the rest of America moves on and leaves them behind.
Who believes that Donald Trump has the better character? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Who believes Joe Biden has the better character? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
No human being is perfect. None of us are perfect. It's a degree. I mean, molesting children, as far as, divorcing your wife or cheating on your wife. I don't know. Those are all moral judgments. I think the real character in someone holding office is what did they do for the people that they represent.
That's astounding. The better character for Trump, just with everything. Even if you say that, like for my mom, for instance, I think my mom says like, "Oh, boys make dumb mistakes, Stevie." But
Oh
we're
my
not
God,
here to
that's
pick
not
the
what she
Pope or
said.
whatever. My mom will say something like that.
Oh my God, that's not the argument she's making. The argument she's making is that she's assigning a character value to his policy standpoints. That's it. What she's saying, and what you're going to see everyone else in this video say, Steve, is that we agree with you. His rhetoric sucks. We agree with you. His Twitter account sucks. But when we have to compare that to his policy, then that's what we're comparing it to. And in terms of policy, these people that want to vote for Trump think that Trump's policy is better than Biden's. Come on.
Curious,
that's all
what
that
an
is.
average American thinks in terms of Trump being a high character person. That's just insane to me.
So you guys choose Joe Biden for better character.
I think he has character in the aspect that he's never been in a hot seat as much as Donald Trump has been. He can talk the talk, he can complain about COVID, he can point the fingers, but he's never been in that position where he has to make decisions. So
before Trump was in the hot seat, to be clear, Trump got famous politically in the beginning because he was talking about the fact that Barack Obama was from Kenya.
And Joe Biden got famous politically because he was a senator for decades. And then get this, Steve, he was our vice president for 8 freaking years, and that wasn't that long ago. Come on.
Before he was in any kind of hot seat, just as an FYI. Also, Biden has been a senator for many, many, many years as well, but he was also the vice president for 8 years as well.
You agree with me
then? One of
then?
the biggest holdups, one of my biggest hesitations in casting a vote. I support a lot of Trump's policies. I agree with a lot of what he's done, but I just really struggle. I don't know how I could in good conscience vote for somebody who speaks the way he speaks and says the things he says. On the other hand, Joe Biden seems much more moral, and although that's a little bit questionable, but he seems much more moral and much more honest, but I don't necessarily agree with his policies. So it's a choice between character and policy.
Okay, Mark, I want to make the point to you that is exactly what I concluded before the debate started, and that this is what I see. I'm going to offer this as a conclusion, then you're going to react and say whether I got it.
Okay, Steve, I really hope you paid attention, because that gaslighting of the position that you just described is a gaslight. This is the actual version of the position. This is a much better description of how people view Trump who are supporters of Trump.
Or don't have it. That you look at Joe Biden as being a more decent person, but he's not coming clean on where he stands. You look at Donald Trump and you know where he stands, but you don't like the way he talks. You don't like the way he communicates. And that's your problem with Trump. So you got doubts about Biden's policies. You got doubts about Trump's behavior. Is that a fair conclusion for how you, and I'm looking at a lot of heads nodding. Jill, your reaction to that?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I've cringed over the past 3.5+ years over President Trump's tweets and how he has treated people and just not been decent and not been presidential. And I feel like that has hurt our country on the world stage. And
So, Steve, you want to walk back that straw man?
So that's super disappointing. And that has been, for me, the question of whether I could vote for him when I agree with many of the policies. And I'm just not sure where Joe Biden, again, stands on many of his policies. Are we going to head towards socialism as a country? For the people on the two coasts, or New York and California, I should say, like, maybe we see as people in more the Midwest or to the South don't want socialism. We don't want socialism. And so if we're heading in that direction, especially with Vice President Harris, I don't want to do that. But I don't know if I could vote for President Trump when he is such a nasty person sometimes.
Okay, Keith, you're going to get the last comment on this. And if Danny, if you can get Francesca Chambers with McClatchy, if she's still there, let's bring her on. Keith, go ahead.
When it comes to character, I think it's a very important question because while President Trump is articulate, I apologize. Joe Biden is articulate. He also flipped, he's been on both sides of every issue. He's flipped for fracking, he's anti-fracking, now he's oddly against oil. With President Trump, you get the exact, he hasn't really varied too much in terms of where he stands. You know exactly what you're getting with Donald Trump. He's not going to say it the best way, but in terms of character,
It's funny because like during the debate, Biden actually brought up a specific point. Trump flip-flops so hard. In the beginning, Trump was talking about how, oh, Xi has given us great messaging on the coronavirus. He's done it. We love China. China's done a great job. We're going to be over this on Easter. And now it's the Chinese.
Oh my God, no. He did not say we were going to be over this by Easter. He was expressing wishful thinking, and it was explicitly clear that what he was doing was, yes, it was probably unrealistically high hopes, but he was offering high hopes. I really hope we can get over this thing by Easter. It would be really nice. Steve, do you really disagree that it would be nice? Would it have been nice to have been over this thing by Easter? Wouldn't that have been nice? Was it unrealistic? Yes, I agree with you. It was unrealistic. Was it anything more than incredibly optimistic? No, it wasn't prescriptive at all. It wasn't, hey, we're going to be over this by Easter. Don't worry about it. No, it was not that at all.
Virus. China sent this virus as a plague upon us. Like China is destroying America. Like Trump has flip-flopped back and forth on so many different issues. It's astounding to me that people don't see that or understand that.
You guys have all talked about the emails tonight and Hunter Biden, the emails, and wanting to hear more about that. I'm just curious as to whether or not that's affecting your decision.
I want an answer on it. And also what scares me is that the media refuses to talk about it. You get shut down on Facebook and Twitter if you even see the link or something. That's scary to me, and I think it deserves an answer.
Yeah,
So to be clear, you can discuss it on Twitter and Facebook. You just can't link to actual like leaked material because that was against their policies. I think Twitter has since updated their policies, but that was the reason why it was removed before, because they have a hacked materials policy where you cannot.
Bullshit. So this was the response that Twitter offered, which was an obvious load of crap days after the Post report has been yeeted from Twitter and to a lesser extent from Facebook. And after they had already gone through like half a dozen obvious other lies in terms of why it is that this article was getting yeeted. And no, you can't actually talk about it on Twitter. I have a friend right now who was in the live stream when we chatted with Destiny in our last video. He has screenshots of him posting a tweet that was simply describing the article and the contents of the article, and boom, post gets yeeted, right? I know people who have had whole accounts yeeted with no strikes on them. Whole accounts yeeted for sharing that one link. If that was the case, then you would just see the blocking of the link, not the yeeting of the entire account. Steve, this is a complete lie. This was an obviously calculated bullshit excuse that was done ex post facto. And obviously the case, especially with all the ad hoc arguments that they were spewing out the moment that the article got yeeted. And by the way, that article got yeeted from Twitter moments after the article went live. Moments after it was published. Not seconds, moments. How in the world could you possibly vet an article on any of its content in a matter of moments? No, clearly what you saw was that this thing was coming out that was going to be negative, that might appear negative towards the Biden campaign in some respect, and off it goes, off with its head, goodbye. That's clear. It was so nakedly partisan political acting. Like, I don't see, like, how naive do you think we honestly are, Steve? Seriously. How naive do you think we honestly are? Especially when, first things first, I know what you're going to say. Oh, well, those emails that you saw in there, who knows if they're real? Well, if they're not real, if they're just recreated screenshots rather than actual screenshots, then there's no violation here. But of course, you have to screen for that sort of thing, which you can't possibly do in an instant, in which Steve, I know your take is going to be that it's not true. Not to mention, it was a hacked, none of that information was hacked. And the policy wasn't illegally obtained material, it's hacked materials policy. And on top of that, the pictures were not obtained illegally. Once you have forfeited that piece of property, pictures that are on that property, yeah, you forfeit all of it, the thing and all of its content. Which means that if there's a CD player in a car, a CD in a car, in a CD player in a car that gets forfeited to whomever, then you own the CD and its contents. Which means if that CD includes you admitting on tape to some sort of nefarious activity, then it is within your purview as to whether or not you want to distribute that material. That is not illegally obtained material. That is very different from Trump's tax returns, for example, which you still to this day can share onto Twitter, right? So this is why we know it's a load of shit. because not only can you link to the New York Times article, which I know we're going to split a hair, didn't screenshot the tax returns themselves because we're going to split that hair, but we know where they came from. And if you share those tax returns themselves, and I believe you still can't, I think you, I might be wrong on this one. I better hold my breath on whether or not you can share the actual tax returns themselves on Twitter. But I'm very sure that I've seen screenshots of them, and from people who did not get instantaneously yeeted. So no, this is just partisan political hackery, and it's obvious.
Link to actual like leaked material because that was against their policies. I think Twitter has since updated their policies, but that was the reason why it was removed before, because they have a hacked materials policy where you cannot share images of materials that you've obtained illicitly. Also, it's insane to me that people will like look at this Hunter Biden stuff that's a huge like nothing burger, but completely turn the other eye on people like Kushner or the $400+ million that Trump owes.
Oh my God. Okay, first things first. How about that nice whataboutism? Also, dude, when a presidential candidate who was a former vice president has news that his son went gallivanting around the world doing every drug under the sun and getting away with figurative murder because he was Biden's son and using his name to leverage basically extortion money out of all kinds of businesses and countries. Yeah, okay, maybe that's not news for Biden, but that isn't a nothing burger. That isn't non-news. Of course that stuff's going to get reported on. Of course people are going to care about it. Maybe they shouldn't be using that information at the ballot box because, yes, I agree. What Hunter Biden did is not what Joe Biden did. And Hunter Biden isn't running for office. And we're not going to be casting our vote either for or against Hunter Biden. It's going to be for Joe Biden. So, yes, I agree with that take, but that's not what's going on here. This isn't a nothing burger.
Or like any of these other pretty crazy that like the Ukraine impeachment. Like these people just don't care about any of this, I guess.
Is of using his drug-addicted son to be a bagman with shady characters all over the world. I mean, you would think you'd want to address that.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Paulette. That is definitely a thing for me. Like, it's a yes or no. And to me, it could be pretty cut and dry because, as a
He
parent.
said no over and over again, though. I'm sorry. I know these are undecided voters. They're giving us our, yeah. He's changing the narrative around something you have little control. The same as changing your stance. Changing the narrative around something you have little control over, the same as changing your stance. So Trump has not changed his stance. Trump is just like, the problem is, here's an example of changing your stance on something in an intelligent way. Okay. So in the beginning, I believe that a lot of people didn't have the clearest of evidence about masks, whether or not they were effective. They were with SARS-CoV-1. They were with like MERS related stuff. And I think like the swine flu. We didn't know 100%. They didn't want to ham up a lot of fear. They didn't want people to run out and buy all the fucking N95 masks and fuck over healthcare workers. So they said in the beginning that
that point you just said kind of contradicts a point you said earlier about people freaking out. So you don't want people to freak out, and you think it's a reasonable take to say that you don't want people to freak out. So let's reserve PPE for the people that really need it because we don't have any evidence just yet. Interesting. Kind of a self-contradictory point to say that and then say 5 minutes earlier that none of that matters.
We're not recommending it. They never said masks weren't effective. They just said they only recommended them for caretakers. Now, eventually, as time went on and we found that even cloth masks were effective, people changed their stance. We're like, okay, yeah, cloth masks are effective.
Okay. Hold on. Time out. Okay. So I know what he's going to come at me with. He's going to come at me with a study. And I'll tell you what that study's going to say. That under laboratory conditions, there is at least some effect from cloth masks. Guess where you don't have laboratory conditions? In non-laboratory settings, such as the real world. This is why when you look at reported wear rates, which I know suffers from self-reporting bias, but this is the only data we have on how often people are actually wearing them. This is why if you compare wear rates in places like the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, Italy, Spain, there's no correlation whatsoever between the actual wear rates and the death rates. There isn't a correlation. Places where you have really low death rates, especially within the last 30 days, are places in Europe where in many respects people aren't wearing masks at even the level that we are here in the United States, even over the last 30 days. I've had to deal with these masks, by the way, for a very long time. I'm a licensed commercial pesticide operator. That means that, and I've been one for decades, that means you have to sit in on horribly boring meetings, tons and tons of horribly boring meetings about PPE and about how to wear masks. One of those meetings, of course, is going to involve something like an N95. This is how you put on an N95. This is when you need to wear an N95. This is when you would prefer a ventilator. This is the place for this type of mask. This is the place for this type of mask. You should be wearing goggles if you're applying the following pesticides and using the following techniques. Sometimes you can get away with a baseball hat. Most times you can't. Most times Deep here in Connecticut recommends that you wear some sort of special material to cover your head. I've sat in on these meetings, and get this, there's a recommended way of wearing the mask. There's a recommended type of usage. And on top of all of that, what they tell you with things like the N95 mask is that when you go to take the mask off, which you should be doing at least daily and disposing of at least daily, and which no one is doing. When it comes to the N95 mask, you're supposed to use gloves and take the mask off with your gloves still on, right? You're supposed to, while you're applying the pesticides, not touch your face. Avoid at all costs touching the mask. Do you really think that people aren't touching these masks constantly? No, they obviously are. You think people are actually throwing them out after a single usage? No, they absolutely are not. Do you think that they're making sure that they actually properly fit correctly? Because one of the things you're supposed to do with an N95 mask, for example, to ensure proper fit is be clean shaven. That means if you have so much as scruff, you aren't wearing it properly, and its effectiveness tremendously declines. So yes, in a laboratory setting where you've got a clean shaven face and you've got somebody who knows what they're doing, forming the mask to their face, using the appropriate mask and not touching their face and only removing the mask with gloves on, yeah, of course it's going to have a completely different effect from what's happening in the real world. And by the way, welcome to the real world, Steve, where, again, there is no correlation between wear rates and death rates.
That's fine. That's way different than Trump saying, it's not a big deal. We have no cases. It's going to be over in a month. It'll be gone by Easter. This thing is a blip on the radar. This thing is blah, 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 blah. It's not a big deal. China's doing great. And then eventually, like, completely and totally 180 on almost every single thing you've saed. Pushing fake drugs like hydroxychloroquine, saying that like masks are down.
No. So the studies that you saw that debunked the initial studies that suggested there might be some preventative use for a cocktail which included hydroxychloroquine for specific patients, again, as a preventative treatment, right? That study, which initially showed some signs of hope, right? That was debunked by studies who only used hydroxychloroquine and didn't use the proper cocktail, and in many cases were applying prescribing the hydroxychloroquine, administering the hydroxychloroquine to patients who should never have had it in the first place. And again, it was limited to in these things you're supposed to control for. If you have control for these independent variables, like the scientific method prescribes, there was some use for it as a preventative treatment, and not as a cure that you're basically gaslighting its description as. So I can't really talk about hydroxychloroquine because I know I'll get yeeted. And by the way, this is what we were talking about earlier, Steve, that I can't even talk about hydroxychloroquine. Like, I'm probably going to get yeeted as it is just for having mentioned the word.
And making fun of people that wear them. Like this type of rhetoric over and over again, that's not evolving your...
He was criticizing virtue signaling, which one side of the aisle is obviously doing virtually every time they wear a mask.
Position or changing it over time as you gather more information. That's just being a hypocritical piece of shit that's just saying shit that is, politically popular or whatever. Summer will kill the virus, yeah.
He didn't say that.
If you think about it, Destiny, panic would have ended us. The White House bought time, albeit dishonestly. Most folks would be too butthurt to agree with this course of action. The problem is that, like, in order for me to say that you're right, I have to accept, like, conflicting realities. So here's the first thing.
How about the reality where you basically agreed with this 2 minutes ago?
That I just can't accept. I don't think it would have destroyed us. I think that if we would have known everything in the beginning, I think we could have handled it. We already had a massive panic. Believe it or not, we did have a massive panic. Remember when people were worried that stores were going to be out of food, when we were buying up 50 million things of toilet paper, 50 million fucking masks. So we already did it. So avoiding the panic That didn't even work well, okay? So one, we didn't avoid the panic, but two, I don't think we would have had a massive panic. Other countries alerted their population, did everything they could immediately, and they handled it. There were no mass panics, unless you believe that Americans are exceptionally
Wait. Does one of those other countries include Sweden, where they alerted the public and they told the people who are elderly and who had comorbidities to stay home, and told everyone else, feel free to go out and get this disease so we can build up some sort of natural immunity through the building up of antibody resistance? You want to talk about Sweden? You want to talk about Sweden, Steve, and their policy, which is radically different from the one you're prescribing?
Stupid or exceptionally prone to panic. That's not true. And two, even if I did accept, I can't even get past that first part. I can't, honestly. It's like diverging worlds. I would have to accept contradictory things to even believe it's true. But even if I did somehow make it past that contradiction, okay? Even if we do ignore the fact that, that we got through the swine flu, that we got through the bird flu, that we got through Ebola, that we got through, any other random fucking health scare, right? Even if I ignore all of that, the second thing is, let's say that Trump was doing that. He wanted to buy time. What was he buying time for? Because
he was buying time for hospitals to build up the PPE, to build up the staff, and to build up the know-how so that they could deal with the inevitable onslaught of patients. This is the whole point of flattening the curve. It wasn't for us to be perpetually in this state of it wasn't for us to be perpetually in this state of shutdown where the economy is just completely destroyed.
What was it? January, February, March. I think it was early February we banned travel from China, and then like halfway through March we banned it from Europe.
Yeah, because the initial reports were saying that the disease came from China, and it probably did when it came into Washington. However, when it came into New York, it probably came in from Europe. Things we found out weeks later.
About a month and a half on the timeline there. Even if we were just trying to buy time, what did we buy time for? Trump wasn't getting PPE ready. We weren't getting testing ready. We weren't getting contact tracing ready. We weren't creating a top-down unified approach for the states to handle opening and closing things like non-essential jobs or schools or federal anything. Like, none of that happened. So when you say that, like, oh,
the top-down approach you're suggesting is something that if he wanted to do in February, as you're suggesting, would have seemed pretty dictatorial, no? Especially in February, during Russia, while he was being impeached. You wanted him to institute some sort of top-down draconian lockdown measure, or some sort of draconian sort of Patriot Act level surveillance so we could do contract tracing? You want him to supersede the sovereignty of the states? Why do you think why do you think in the Constitution it refers to itself as a more perfect union of states, right? It's a union of states. We don't call ourselves provinces for a reason, because that we believe in the sovereignty of the states, and we embedded that into the 10th freaking amendment. Come on, Steve.
Oh, I was just giving us time to prepare. Okay, cool. Well, here we are. What'd you prepare? Oh, fuck. Nothing. Like, it doesn't really work. So, no, I reject that.
Oh, my God. No. So, no. So, he got more PPE to hospitals than was ever projected. He got more respirators than were ever even close to needed into these hospitals. This is just a lie.
Bullshit. Sorry.
That sounds like the same thing that we heard about, was it Ukraine, with Donald Trump too? I mean, all of this it's just another confusing situation.
And show of hands, who says it's not an issue and you're annoyed that we're wasting time on it? James and Keita. Keita, tell me why it's not an issue.
Look, all politicians lie. I mean, some of them are very honest and truthful, but most of the time politicians lie. It's those that cover the lies and does it well. But
keep in mind that in the United States, if you're European and you're still awake and you're watching this, for the United States, we have fundamentally a massive distrust of government and bureaucracy. It's a little bit different than the relationship that some Europeans have with their governments, although it's not necessarily the same. But like most Americans
are skeptical of our federal government and are skeptical of rule of tyranny of the majority, because we actually lived underneath that, and we rebelled against the tyranny of the governing country at the time, which was Great Britain. So yeah, we have some real skepticism, as I hope one day future Chinese people will have when it comes to their own government.
Americans like think that government is like a spooky bad thing.
Yeah, same thing with Hong Kong.
Which is a little bit different than the average or general view of like a European of government. Although not to say that every European loves all the government as well, but that's like an average view like an American will have about government.
It's a good thing.
At the end of the day, somebody will find out the truth. So I mean, in my stance, I mean, it really doesn't matter because politicians are in it to lie to the American people anyway. So.
And James, why don't you think it's an issue?
Well, I feel like I was going through what everybody here in your panel was going through at some point. And back in 2016, I was telling my family, don't vote for Hillary Clinton. I surrendered everything to vote for Trump and support him.
Why does this view arise in Americans? Like, why are they so uniquely anti-government? I mean, it's a pretty embedded part of like American law, constitution, society, and culture that the entire founding of this country was basically like, fuck government trying to tax us.
Kind of. So, Steve, what you forget is that when the English people who settled the United States, they were doing so to flee their own tyranny. Yeah, the people who settled, the Puritans who settled down, and Plymouth Rock, as we know it, and eventually formed Boston. Those people were fleeing religious persecution. Great Britain has a pretty jaded history when it comes to religious tolerance, especially in the early colonial and pre-colonial period. We have the phrase Bloody Mary for a reason.
And other things as well. Like, it's a pretty fundamental undercurrent of like all American thought that the government sucks and should do as little as possible.
I mean, primarily my reason was, Hillary and Obama.
Destiny, but how can you prepare when information was being withheld from China? They thought it was a simple flu at first that would blow over in 2 to 3 months. Not true. The only thing that China withheld was for about a week. China didn't release the actual sequencing of the genome until another company figured it out, and then they released the information that they
Oh my God, come on. No, what he's referring to is when those doctors came out and said, hey, we got this big deal, and got drummed off into the gulags in October and November, Steve. This is what we're talking about. We could have had this information before Christmas of last year, and we didn't because China withheld this information.
The idea that China was withholding some crucial information doesn't make sense.
That
if
it
you believe
exists.
That's true. Why was South Korea able to deal with this virus so much more effectively than us when they had the exact same date for the first reported case? Why?
Wow.
Why did other countries in Southeast Asia deal with this so much better than the United States? It is not true that China was withholding information. That is just not true. It's a lie.
Okay. Steve, we're going to go into this in a minute, but you shouldn't be using South Korea as an example. So, first things first, South Korea did what it did with every disease it gets. When it gets a common cold, it locks down. And I know what you're going to say, it didn't lock down, it went into contact tracing. How do you think it was able to do the contact tracing it was able to do? Because of surveillance that would have been obvious and clear Fourth Amendment violations. If you thought the Patriot Act was bad news, wait until you see what contact tracing in South Korea looks like when we bring it to the United States. And we're going to get into this in a minute, but Steve, you really shouldn't be using South Korea as some sort of panacea where they managed to somehow cure COVID by doing what they did, which would have never flown in this country.
The Trans-Pacific, the TPP trade deal, and that was one of my major concerns for voting for Trump. And along the way, I just sort of like discoveries here. Just it seemed like
shilling for China. I'm not shilling for anybody. You clueless dipshit. See ya. Bye. Go jerk off in some dumb. I don't even know if you're a lefty or a fucking conservative. I don't know. It's hard to tell when I see stupid shit in my chat now, but.
So in the end, we're rebranding the TPP, and so
because the WHO said it was fine, but Asian countries knew that China and the WHO. were like, okay, I'm only saying, I know that you're not.
No, in fairness to Steve, the reason South Korea did what it did was because that's how they react to everything. They didn't need any more information than what they had. They had, oh well, there's this disease that could be breaking out. This is why it's been common knowledge that. For decades, if you go to an airport, the easiest way to determine if there's a Korean at the airport is to see if they have a mask on their face. Again, decades before COVID. This is just what they do. This is what they do regardless of what they know about the disease. There's a disease. Boom. Institute the South Korean draconian Patriot Act policy.
We're not going to listen because you're typing in chat, so you're probably more ego-driven than most, but hopefully some conservative out there is listening. So if you think that China's lying, okay? If you believe that China was lying and Southeast Asian countries were smart enough to pick up on this, you don't think that the United States, with a president that has been more hostile towards China than any of the past 5 or 6 administrations we've had.
More hostile to China than any president in the past 5 administrations. Is that what you just said? I might have gotten that quote imperfect, but remember what he said earlier about how he's just kind of, at one point he was giving Xi the pass? So which one is it, Steve?
You don't think that guy would have been a little bit suspect of China? You don't find it weird that one of the most combatant towards China president we've ever had would just trust them when it comes to something like this? How does that make sense to you? Like, is there a little bit of cognitive dissonance in your head where it's like, man, all these other countries trusted China, or didn't trust China. All these other countries knew China was lying. But our president that's been historically tariffing them, fighting them in the courts, pulling out of agreements, like that guy trusted China? Like, How does that make sense? That can't make sense to you. There must be some like uncomfortable, like, fuck, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Like, why the fuck would Trump trust China when he's distrusted them on everything else? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It has to be like triggering your brain a little bit.
I am disheartened by this process. And
Well, it wasn't just China. He was trusting the reports he was getting from all directions initially, which were in alignment with the reports from China initially. They were, plainly. Yes, yes, as more reports started coming in from not China, it turned out that China was full of crap, at least initially.
And I'm hopeful in 4 more years, we can come up with 2 other candidates that will represent more me.
And is there anyone out there, I'm just going to ask you, is there anyone out there that does represent you? Is there anyone you particularly like?
Me? Not yet. I felt like I was robbed in this cycle. It was selected on Super Tuesday that Joe Biden was going to be my candidate for the Democratic Party. And I was like, seriously? That's who we pick? Okay, so now it's been like...
This lady, I don't know why. I just can fucking see. It's because I've done politics long enough. I can just see into her fucking brain. I know exactly who this lady is. And she, my good friends, is a goddamn Tulsi Gabbard supporter. I can feel it.
Oh, yeah. How about that? A Democrat that doesn't want socialism. A Democrat that believes that we shouldn't be involving ourselves in foreign wars. And by the way, Tulsi's policies do look a lot like socialism, but Tulsi is by all means a moderate compared to some of the other people that were running. Is that really your take here, Steve? Because I thought you were actually a capitalist. I thought you were okay in certain respects with free markets. I thought you were not by any means a communist, which is what many of those people that were up on stage were explicitly calling themselves and what their policies looked exactly like if you dig into why they were prescribing those policies.
See it. I just got it. I just got it right from her brain. I know she is. She's a Tulsi Gabbard. I can tell she's a Tulsa. I can just feel it radiating off of her. I don't know why. I just got the feeling.
So many other people that we could have had.
And for the record, Steve, if you wanted Trump out of office so bad, these polls would not be close if Tulsi was your candidate. If Tulsi was your candidate, all of these swing states would be plus 12 Tulsi. So you could have a sure thing. Now, I know the election's on Tuesday. We're four days away from the election. You could have a sure thing with Tulsi, where you're absolutely guaranteed to get Donald Trump out of office. Or you could have the coin flip, which is Biden.
And I didn't get a chance to vote in Michigan. I didn't get a chance to really have my voice be heard and hear more people say something. And so I am disappointed and disheartened. These are my 2 people I get to choose.
So as I'm going to call on you next.
Destiny's so misinformed on China, it's like he's trolling. What do you want to talk about regarding to China? Because I've read about this dumb shit so much. I've argued about fucking pharmaceutical shit or medicine. We can talk about hydroxychloroquine for a million years if you want. We can talk about stuff related to the US and China and the WHO if you want. Like, what part do you think I just said was wrong? We can argue about any of this. I've gone through so much of this with fucking Nuance Bro and other dipshits that think that either China held out misinformation for years. It's so funny. Like, the thing is that I can just...
They axiomatically did. What do you think sending those doctors off to the gulags was in October and November, Steve? What do you think that was? What do you think lying to their own people about what was going on? What do you think that was? When they had this information, again, months before anyone knew about this. Months. What do you call that, Steve?
I can destroy your entire narrative with just a couple questions. Like, here's the first one. If China withheld so much information, why was South Korea able to perform so well in regards to this virus?
My God. They did not perform so well. They just delayed the inevitable.
Same case, the same day. I want to know what the answer to that is. Once you can answer that, then we'll move past, okay? I'll be looking at YouTube chat excitedly, okay? South Korea has a much smaller population than the USA. First of all, hold on. South Korea population, 52 million people. But that's not even the most important part. The most important part is population density. What do you think the United States population density is? 36 people per square kilometer compared to 515 inhabitants per square kilometer. I wonder what it even is for like California, or how about like for New York? We were to compare like New York to Seoul. It's 421 people per square mile. The overall population doesn't matter, right? So for instance, what we're looking at things like population density. If we did want to look at just population, right? Let's say you wanted to just go by population. I think Germany Germany population or France. Germany's a bit higher. France, okay, Italy. Italy has about 60 million people, okay? South Korea has about 52 million people. Let's take a look at Italy, okay? 37,000 deaths. Let's compare that to 455 deaths. Show me what other equivalent population countries had this response. It's not just because it's a smaller population. And population isn't even the relevant part here. It's population density. South Korea, Singapore, several countries in the region have already faced pandemics in the recent years. They had the experience and the protocols to face it. The U.S. had nothing to prepare for it. What are you talking about? We literally had the whole H1N1 bullshit, the swine flu bullshit. We already did that.
Where we did nothing. Where we did basically nothing. Is that what you're really prescribing, Steve? Because the lockdown measures you're talking about were not prescribed in that H1N1 shit.
Already had the Ebola thing. The past administration literally ran an entire fucking trial, the Project Contagion or whatever the fuck it was called, to simulate an issue if we would have a pandemic in the United States. You can't say that we weren't prepared for it. We literally, as Biden said, as Obama said, we literally had a playbook for how to deal with stuff like this. Also, what about New Zealand? Have they dealt with a fuck ton of pandemics?
Oh my God, you just talked about population density. New Zealand, where there are more sheep than people? Come on.
Because if you look at New Zealand's numbers, and admittedly,
an isolated island chain. An isolated island chain where you have, again, more sheep than people. How do you prevent the spread of COVID into that country? Well, since it hadn't gotten to that country, you lock down the borders. Done. And then it doesn't come into the country. And you let everyone else move about within your borders as freely as they so choose. Hello. Come on, Steve.
Much smaller area, though. 25 deaths. Population density doesn't matter, Destiny. It's not correlated at all with higher transmission when controlling for other factors.
That's actually stupid. Whoever said that in chat's actually an idiot.
Okay, well,
that's like the single best predictor for transmission.
If you don't want to go by population density, then fine. If you think that is irrelevant, then fine. Then just do 1/6 the U.S. population times our deaths, and then 1/6 the South Korea population times our deaths, and look at the ratio. That doesn't help your case either. H1N1 and Ebola is nothing compared to SARS in Asia. I am from New Zealand, and having one unified central government does make rolling out lockdowns, et cetera, much easier. We have a central government in the United States.
Oh my
we have
God.
a federal government. We just didn't have any leadership in the federal government.
We also have a constitution, Steve. We also have a constitution and a Fourth Amendment. What do you think it would have taken to get the lockdown, because there were some lockdown measures, and contact tracing measures that they had in South Korea? What do you think it would have taken? It would have taken just completely taking all of the laws that you have about wiretapping and just throwing them into a paper shredder. It would have, you meant taking the Fourth and probably Fifth and Sixth Amendments and dumping them into a paper shredder. Like, again, if you thought the Patriot Act was bad, wait until you get the South Korea contact tracing protocol. Yeah, and by the way, Steve, if you seriously think that this was going to go through Congress in February while there was an impeachment going on, if you really think that if Mitch McConnell had gotten that through the Senate, forced that through the Senate, and then plopped it on Nancy Pelosi's desk, like what? You really think Nancy Pelosi would have been like, yeah, I'm all for, allowing our NSA to have way more discretionary authority than they have ever had. I'm all for just completely setting fire to the wiretapping laws in this country. Yeah, I'm all for that. You really think that's what would have happened? No, this would have had to have come down from Trump. This would have had to have been in the form of an EO. This complete dissolution of the Fourth Amendment would have had to have come down from an EO. On what planet is the Democrat response to that in February during Russia? On what planet is that anything other than outrage? Yeah, you're outraged he didn't do that. But if he had done that back then, you would have been outraged that he did do that. He's not a dictator. We have a constitution. We have a 10th Amendment that allows states to have lots of discretion when it comes to these sort of things. And there's a reason for that. They aren't answerable to the president. The president is the chief executive of the federal government, which is in many respects separate from the state governments. Your analogy that and I don't know if it was in this video or if it was in a previous video or another video, but you made the analogy at one point that the governors are somehow analogous to employees of Trump, who is analogous to their employer. No, Trump can't just fire Ned Lamont. Trump can't just fire Cuomo. And again, what do you think the Democrat response would have been to something like that? What do you think it would have been to, for all intents and purposes, usurping these roles? Well, of course it would have been outrage. It is laudable that he has resisted the type of authority that it would have taken in a legal sense to do what you're prescribing. He would have needed some sort of extension of military emergency martial law powers in order to do that. And for for a pretty lengthy term here too, Steve. Like this, you are utterly delusional if you think that this would not have been met with outrage, just like what we're seeing, just like what you're indicating here over the response.
This difference is likely cultural. Korean people adopted PPE and other forms of protection, and Americans still fight it. The most important thing South Korea did, if I'm correct, was contact tracing, was aggressive measures to trace who was infected, get them locked down. It wasn't just wearing masks. It wasn't just staying away from each other. It was the aggressive contact tracing they did, contact tracing, and locking down people that they thought were infected and figuring out who was infected. That was the thing that South Korea did differently. How could we do that in the US? But we didn't even believe it was a real problem.
How could we do that in the U.S. when we have a Fourth Amendment? When it would have required the type of surveillance that South Korea already has in place in its citizens that we would never have accepted in this country?
Destiny, the cure can't be worse than the solution. Do you think the cure in South Korea was worse than the solution?
I
Do you think
really
that the
hope
455 deaths in South Korea is...
I really hope you're just turning this guy's words against him. I really hope you're not calling this delaying of the inevitable, because that's what they've done, and we're going to have to go over the statistics in South Korea, which he's not going to the charts on this.
Is challenge that harder. Destiny, population density plays a giant role in the spread of an airborne virus. Yeah, I'm 99% sure that it does, but I don't even have to argue that point. Because South Korea has a massively subservient culture. The American culture of freedom and anti-government is what made it great, but it is also the reason it's responded to the virus poorly. I disagree. I think that in the past, the United States has come together and been pretty oppressed, like pretty hardcore, in order to do things that we thought we needed to do for war efforts. And for World War II, when we had like...
Do you really think, Steve, that we're going to come together and describe coronavirus, knowing what we know now, as equivalent in any way, morally, even remotely equivalent to the existential crisis that was World War II? Are you really going to make that suggestion? Like, first things first, World War II was the deadliest international anything ever. Like, what's the total death rate? We got to look this up. $70 to 85 million people. Civilian deaths totaled 50 to 55 million people. I wonder if this includes the genocides in China, and I wonder if this includes the genocides, the Holocaust. Okay, Holocaust deaths. Okay, I guess they are including Holocaust deaths. Yeah, I guess they are including Holocaust deaths. But 70 to 85 million people. COVID deaths worldwide. $1.18. I know what you guys are going to say. Well, you got to divide by the number of years. Okay, we're at like 9 million deaths a year. We're at 9 million deaths a year. And there isn't some sort of worldwide cohesive effort to come up with an actual cure, to come up with at least some sort of vaccine which will mitigate these deaths in the future. In fact, there was the exact opposite of that going on in World War II. The only reason it came to an end is because the Soviets marched in from the east and the Allies marched in from the west, converged, and completely decimated Germany and their army.
Like sports games, and we were doing broadcasts for sports games, the people wouldn't talk about the weather because it was against the law, right? Like, we were so hardcore in making sure that enemies of the state listening to our broadcasts couldn't figure out any kind of conditions related to the United States, that we were so careful on every single broadcast we did that even news reporters or even people like talking about sports games wouldn't say if it's a sunny day.
Because the figurative lead poisoning is a lot more difficult to survive than coronavirus, Steve. Come on.
If it's raining, right? This idea that we can't do like contact tracing to find a virus, I don't believe you. I don't. We fucking threw out like
oh my god,
fucking Japanese.
No. So you're talking about the type of contact tracing they did in South Korea, which again would mean disposing of the Fourth Amendment.
Population into goddamn camps in World War II. Okay, you're gonna tell me that we can't do contact tracing? Come on.
Yeah, and that was terrible,
bro. I don't buy that for a fucking second. Come on. We didn't even have testing because the CDC screwed up. I don't think there was a drive to seriously get testing figured out. I don't believe that. I reject that. I still think that the United States, when fully mobilized, has more capabilities than any other single country on this planet. That's my...
As evidenced by the fact that we're doing more testing, even on a per capita basis, than any other country, and by a lot.
American exceptionalism talking, and it's a fact we're the biggest goddamn economy and one of the best innovators in the fucking world. I do not believe sincerely that there was this huge push in the United States to figure out how to get a fucking test done correctly, that it takes us more than fucking 2 months to do it. I reject that wholeheartedly. No.
Then you have never dealt with the FDA. Welcome to the world of libertarians, where we want to get rid of these regulations that are burdensome. Welcome to the world where drugs come to markets from manufacturers in the United States, in markets outside of the United States, years before they come into market here in the United States. Because get this, we have a regulatory market which prohibits those things from realistically coming to market anywhere near as quickly as they can come into market in places like Europe and Asia.
No fucking way did every other country figure out how to test properly for fucking coronavirus, and the United States just somehow couldn't get it done. We couldn't get it done because the political will wasn't.
No, that's bullshit. We basically all figured out how to do the testing within a week of each other. And it was simply the number of tests we had available, which, by the way, because Trump directed these companies to refocus production towards these things, because there were restrictions lifted from the FDA, from the pen of the EO, right, that allowed these tests to be manufactured on and scale before they met all of the testing requirements from the FDA, so that the moment they met those requirements, we already have them in place. Yeah, that's what happens here in the United States. That's what happened here in the United States.
There for it. Full stop. 100%. Unless, if you honest to God think that we couldn't figure out a fucking test, then I don't know what the fuck. I don't know how you can simultaneously think America is this great, amazing country that can do all this shit, but we don't know how to test for a fucking virus. I don't believe it. You can't have it both ways. Would you agree the overall health of a country plays a big role in deaths? USA is one of the most obese countries out there. Underlying issues causes most...
Oh my God, I really hope you actually agree with this. Like, I really hope that he gets that the underlying health of somebody, which is like the single biggest predictor for COVID is, well, there's two predictors: obesity, age, right? We're not that old. We're not that old compared to places like Italy, right? Italy's much older. Also, we're way fatter than like every country in the world that isn't like Samoa, which actually isn't that a territory of the United States anyways? Nauru. We're not as fat as Nauru.
Deaths and people getting corona. No, it doesn't work that way. I don't even know if I feel like going into that. Comorbidity means that coronavirus didn't actually kill you. It was the comorbidity.
It was.
Oh no, comorbidities are predictive of deaths. Destiny, come on.
Absolutely horrible. And this time I was hoping that we might have some more interesting candidates. And it's really disappointing to me. There were a lot of interesting people that maybe I didn't always agree with their politics on the Democratic side, but people who had interesting ideas and fresh perspectives. And it's really disheartening that it's come down to Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
I teach in an inner city environment. None of these candidates talk to my students and my students. And I think it's a necessity that these candidates need to start caring about the common everyday person. Everyone's talking about everyone but the common everyday person.
Wait, Destiny doesn't want to get into the uncomfortable issue? What? I'll get into the issue if you want. The reason why coronavirus is listed as a cause of death on a death certificate is because having a comorbidity means that you are going to be killed by the coronavirus earlier than if you wouldn't have had it. If you have
God, that's not the issue they're talking about. They're talking about people who are dying in car accidents and who are labeled as coronavirus deaths because they died with coronavirus and not necessarily from coronavirus. So I agree with you that these are kind of rare exceptions to the rule, generally speaking, and that as far as I can tell, the policy was meant, at least, to apply to cases where there wasn't a clear cause of death, but they died with corona. And in order to get reporting done quickly, they would say, let's just default to corona until we can do more research on the individual that we're actually doing, that we're doing an autopsy on. So yes, I agree, Steve, with the fact that these are probably the exception and not the rule, but it is a mitigating factor. It is something that is going to necessarily have an inflationary effect on these numbers.
2, 3, 4 comorbidities, if you're overweight, if you're diabetic, if you're older, if you've got hypertension or whatever, and you get killed by the coronavirus, did the coronavirus kill you or did you die because of your diabetes or hypertension? Yeah, it was probably the high blood pressure and the diabetes that probably killed you, but you wouldn't have died if you didn't have the coronavirus. This is how comorbidities work in every single other fucking disease you talk to. You're never actually killed. Most diseases don't kill you. I don't know if you knew that or not. Most diseases, like HIV, has not a single person in the history of the entire planet has been killed by HIV, ever, never. It has never, ever, ever fucking happened. Because you don't.
This is actually true. This is actually true. You don't die from HIV when it comes to AIDS. You die from this syndrome and the effects of the syndrome, which in this case would be like pneumonia. Like normally you wouldn't die from pneumonia, but you have AIDS, so you're going to die from pneumonia. You die from, in some cases, even the common cold.
You don't die by having AIDS. HIV doesn't kill, it just kills your white blood cells. It just kills your parts of your immune system. Opportunistic infections kill you. You sound like some guy that's like, oh, well, he didn't actually die by HIV. You know, it was an opportunistic infection, bro. It's not HIV at all. Like, how?
Oh my God. So you're conflating two issues here. So Steve, comorbidities are predictive of deaths, which means that if you have a population with lots of comorbidities, you're going to predict more deaths. The other thing is that when it comes to reporting of the statistics, that guy is not talking about. The first guy was talking about what I just said. This last guy is talking about when you have car accident victims, you have gunshot wound victims who are dying of coronavirus, where it's obviously a fallacious report.
How fucking stupid are you? That's not how any medicine works. You can look at any number of medical examiners, any number of people that talk about how any of these statistics are counted. I'm pretty sure Fauci himself, other people in NIH, other people in CDC have talked about how these stats are tabulated and how they actually figure out like, oh, well, is this coronavirus death or is it not? You know, there's reasons why the numbers change afterwards. They go through, they gather all the numbers, they go back and look at some. Some they toss out, most they end up keeping. This idea, and even if we wanted to throw all of that, even if we wanted to get rid of all of that and say, oh, fuck, dude, comorbidities, you're right. All we could do is we could look up, oh, how about excess mortalities? If we look up excess mortalities in the United States, why are so many more fucking people dying? Fuck, just show me a goddamn graph. Why are so many more fucking people dying right now from comorbidities? How did that happen? Like, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, it couldn't possibly be that a contributing factor is people not seeking medical attention because they're afraid to go to the doctor. It couldn't be that, Steve. No. It couldn't be that there's other things that aren't coronavirus that people are dying of because they're not seeking proper medical attention.
Sense, unless you're delusional. Dustin, while I agree with you, excess deaths isn't enough. Deaths can increase due to lack of help elsewhere. Heard this from my college professor. Okay, sure. But lack of help due to what? What's filling up hospitals that's causing people to not get help?
Who wants the job? That's
not coronavirus. There are only a handful of hospitals that ever reach capacity, Steve.
the issue. There's not many people that want the job.
I want to ask if...
yeah, not to mention the, I think Destiny misunderstood the comorbidity argument. No, dude, we've gone through the comorbidity bullshit so much. People claiming that like, oh, in Florida, 90% of cases, what was the number? Like 94%, the big one, I think this was federally, not Florida. 94% of coronavirus cases weren't actually people dying because of the coronavirus. They were just dying because their fucking lungs stopped working. Oh, like, dude, you're so stupid. Oh my God.
How COVID is playing into your decision in November, and also kind of separately to that are you thinking about normalcy? Because we've seen...
No, they're saying the U.S. has a higher rate of comorbidities, so coronavirus kills people. What about, just look at how many people are infected. Does having a comorbidity mean you're even more likely...
Oh my God, the number of cases doesn't tell you shit about the case itself. I don't care about the number of people infected. Also, yes, get this, comorbidities predict deaths. So, of course, if you have a country with a lot of comorbidities, and especially one like obesity, you're going to predict a lot more deaths. And by the way, Steve, we're still doing pretty damn good in terms of deaths per million if you actually divide by that number. Yes, 250,000 deaths. There's 330 million people in this country, Steve. Seriously. Like, we're really not doing that bad in terms of deaths per million. And you know what? We need to have the South Korea conversation, because if we're going to talk about deaths per million, if we're going to do some variable control, let's do it. Let's do it. Worldometers. Let's do countries. Oh, view by country. Sort. Make sure you guys can actually see this. Why don't we have South Korea here? Oh, because it's listed as S Korea. Okay. Okay, that's your new spike. That's your spike in daily cases. That's your spike in daily cases. You ready for this? That's your spike in active cases. Okay. Okay. That's your spike in deaths. Folks, this doesn't look good. It looks to me like this isn't a cure, as Destiny, I really hope, wasn't describing it. If you're going to call it a cure, that doesn't look like a cure to me. Here, let me make sure that we actually have this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there you go. There's your daily deaths, right? So in the beginning, we had a pretty steep deaths. By the way, we had like, what is that? It is our peak daily deaths happened February 20th. Our peak daily deaths happened in March 24th, right? Right? So that's still over a month before we have any effects actually manifest themselves. Yeah, and then they plummet to like 1 or 0 in terms of daily deaths. By the way, there's another state that looks like this graph. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, now it's happening. Now we're having a spike. And if you divide the daily deaths by the daily cases, it doesn't look good, dude. It doesn't look good. It looks to me like they didn't have a cure. It looks to me like they were delaying the inevitable. And at some point, like, people have to pay their bills. At some point, you have to eat. And if that's going to be the case, you got to pay these bills. Because at some point, death by starvation is still death. Yes, death by COVID is bad. Also, so is death by starvation. And I know, I'm using basically hyperbole to describe all of this. But the reality here is that you really shouldn't be looking. Let me see if I got this correct. Got this lined up correctly. Yeah, okay. There's your cases in South Korea. What happened the moment they got even the slightest bit lax on their policy? They had spikes. The same sort of spikes you'd predict. Now, the other thing is that these numbers way over here, all the way on the left-hand side, yeah, they weren't very big because their lockdown measures went into effect about the second week of March. There's March 7th. There's their spike, right? Okay, now we're going to fall off a cliff. Let's go to another place. Let's go to USA. Let's go to the state where I live, Connecticut. Okay. Okay. There's our daily deaths. So our daily death trend looks a whole lot better than South Korea, right? Like, we still had this period where we had daily deaths 5, daily deaths 2, daily deaths 4, daily deaths 6, a whole week of 1s and 0s. Like, a whole lot of single-digit deaths here in Connecticut. Okay, now let's look at the spike in cases. Whoa, we're having a giant spike in cases. Wow, how about that? Well, we're having a bit of a pretty steep spike in active cases in Connecticut. Now, I realize that deaths are downstream of cases, but what does it look like so far? Are we rocketing up? Does it look like a gradual increase? Like, what's a bad day for us? 12? 12? That's really not that bad when you consider the worst day we had in Connecticut, which instituted basically the policies that you're prescribing here, Steve, was 204. Okay? And the other thing that needs to be mentioned here that's true is that South Korea is not the United States in terms of its constituency. They already were wearing masks like everywhere they went. They already had a policy in place where if you have the common flu or the common cold, you stay home. That's what people were already doing. They already had policies in place that said that if we are going to send an individual a letter to stay home, and if they don't stay home, we're going to impose some sort of punishment upon them. Again, there's no way that flies here in the United States. There's no way that doesn't get met with some sort of challenge and see some sort of court case where that gets overturned. So I would say the model that we're looking at here in terms of deaths in Connecticut looks a whole lot better, especially when you divide that by the cases, right? Our caseload is basically where we were at peak, basically there, right? Well, maybe we're not there quite, maybe it's less apt to call it there because this looks like weekend reporting. But at the same time, what were our deaths back then? Our deaths looked like this, all the way on the left. Now what do they look like? What does that tell you? What does it tell you? That Connecticut had some great policy, or that everybody got it and everyone who got it either built up an antibody immunity or died? That's what that tells you. To me, what's happening in South Korea doesn't look like a cure. It looks to me, again, if we go back to our countries, we go back to South Korea, Korea, for whatever reason they have it listed that way. Yeah. So that's your spike in cases. That's your spike in deaths. What does that tell you? Again, this isn't a cure. This is just a delaying of the inevitable, right? This is, if you want to wait this out indefinitely, which is what South Korea has basically given up on at this point, then what you're going to find is that people are going to die of other things. This is going to get so much worse before it gets better. At some point, Steve, you do have to actually accept that people get this, have to eat. And in order to eat, they get this, they have to go back to work. It looks like we're getting a little bit dark here. So let me turn my camera's gain up. Just a hair. Nah, you know what? That's a bit bright. So yeah, I don't know if I want to debate Steve on all of this, but I hope this has been a bit more entertaining. I hope I haven't put anyone else to sleep. And yeah, maybe Steve, we ought to really talk about this because I think we disagree here on this one. Anyways, hope you've all enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Good night.